Hello, and welcome to the Todd and Taylor Show. We are live tonight.
Hi, everybody.
Well, not really live. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask.
We're live in the sense that we are actually together in the same room, which is something we have not done since we started this podcast. In fact, we haven't seen each other since we started the podcast, which is maybe even more unusual.
That is. Although it was the last time we saw each other where we're like, you know what we should do? These conversations should be recorded, man.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where we
tonight, really, our goal is to pick up some sponsors. I'm thinking this Bundaberg ginger beer is
Bundaberg.
Yeah, it's
ginger beer,
wonderful.
Australian family owned, craft brewed over 3 days. So, invert bottle before opening. That's what they say here.
Yeah, it is. It's my favorite, and
It's lovely.
And that's what we're drinking tonight in the studio, which I've decorated with at least one Transformer. And a whole bunch of D&D dice.
Now, who is this Penn and Teller as Simpsons characters?
Yes.
Over to my right here?
Yes,
that is amazing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that existed.
I know, and Teller has a ball of magic. I won't take him out of the package, of course, but that's his prop down there.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I was very excited. I bought those at Kamikaze last year.
I think there's no doubt that you have reached a certain level of success when you have been not only turned into an action figure, but turned into a Simpsons derivative action figure.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, that sort of solidifies forevermore.
You have the cachet to be recognized during the 25 of the greatest guest stars. That's what, anyway, it's a toy. Geez. I got Penn and Teller toys that are from The Simpsons.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of crap like that, but I don't know.
I saw a lot of crap like that today. Honestly, I was in Chattanooga. There is a store called the Green Door Toys, kind of in their East Nashville, other side of town. You cross the river, and it's this husband and wife team. They're young, young couple. You walk in there, and I'm not even kidding you. It's a room. The room we're in right now, where we're recording, it's about this size, and it has every single Transformer toy, Ninja Turtle toy, My Little Pony, anything from the 80s or early 90s that you could ever want. And it was to the point I had kind of intended to go in and pick up a few things to take back with me. And I got so overwhelmed, I had to leave just to sort my list out, went to have lunch. And then I was going to go back, but I'm like, I don't have the time to go back in. So I didn't. So I'm going to have to give them some love next time I'm in town. But it was pretty ridiculous. And it wasn't one of those, you know how sometimes you walk into those toy stores and it's just kind of a like a hoarder's design, hoarder's mess. It's just, strewn about. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, but it was very nicely organized, very nicely displayed. And I was very impressed with what they have going on. Yeah.
And I don't want to mention this name. You and I have talked a couple of times about stores we like and stuff. We're happy to mention names of places we like.
Yeah.
There's a place here locally in Nashville that I should like, but I don't. And you've hit upon one of the things, which is it's like not organized.
Yeah.
It's like there's literally boxes that are like have a Sharpie, has written on the side and it says like old Star Trek toys or something. And it's just parts and stuff. And you're like,
sure.
Oh my God.
You got to make something out of it and decide. You price it yourself and just bring up money and they decide yes or no.
It's just, but put some effort into it, because that's what I've also cited a couple times. Meltdown in LA is just the perfect comic book toy, geek culture store. Like it is so well put together that it's almost too sanitized for my taste.
Sure.
I almost want some dirt and grime and stuff, but it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Can't argue with it.
I like my comic store dirty.
Yeah. I like Comics Unlimited in Huntington Beach was my local. I think I've given them props before, and they I just well organized. You knew where the new releases were. Mm-hmm. You knew where the toys were. It was just well done.
I'm looking at Meltdown now on Google Images. It does look pretty badass.
Yeah, I mean that's why they do the what is it, Nerd Melt or whatever they do, like the comedy shows and stuff there. So
yeah. It's a cool space.
Yeah, it's I maybe I've only been in it once.
Left an impact though.
Yeah,
left a mark. I know how that goes.
It wasn't local enough for me. It was like to get to easily.
Oh, sure.
It's on like Hollywood Boulevard or something. You got to park. It's like a pain in the ass. So
gotcha.
So let's hit the quick mentions we had, because it's been it's been a while since we caught up.
It has. It's been too long, unfortunately. But there's been. What's nice is there's been enough cool stuff that has kind of come out. We're kind of in this weird sort of lull period now before just everything starts to pop again.
Yeah.
One of those things is the Netflix Jessica Jones show. Which, have you seen the trailer?
No, I haven't seen anything, but I don't even know who this character is. I
didn't
feel
either.
so ignorant about this
didn't
because
either. I didn't read it.
Yeah, my Twitter feed is full of it, and I'm just like, I don't even know who this is.
I'm intrigued for 3 reasons. One, I'm always a fan of strong female protagonists in any story, so that check that off right away. 2, did you watch Breaking Bad back when it was on?
No, I've tried several times to get into it and have not.
So those of you out there who have seen Breaking Bad, it is Jesse's girlfriend. What's her? I just can't think of her name now. I watched what's her face die. What's her? Oh God, Walt says it. Anyway, it's the black-haired girl in Breaking Bad. Her name's going to come to me. If you're listening now and you're yelling at me, like focus your attention on me, and I will hear the name.
Is it Jane?
Jane, thank you. God.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Google to the rescue.
Thank you. So the actress who plays Jane, and who's been in some other stuff too, she plays Jessica Jones, and she's an incredible actress. And and this seems to be like the right marriage of parts. But then third and most importantly, David Tennant is in it.
Oh.
Doctor Who's own David Tennant playing the bad guy. Of Zebediah Kilgrave, the Purple Man, who, strangely enough, I have been more intrigued by as a villain. And I haven't read many of the comics, but he popped up on one of those Avengers cartoon series,
right?
On Netflix, like Avengers Assemble or whatever, one of those. He was just a villain of the week that popped up. It was actually voiced by Brent Spiner from Star Trek, of all people. But I was so intrigued by just this as a character. I'm like, imagine if Professor X from X-Men, with just the power, not to move planes with his mind, but just the power to influence people. You always see him like in the movies freezing people and having using his Jedi mind trick on people. Like,
sure,
what if that was used for evil, and that a villain could basically make you do whatever, make you do anything against your will for his own benefit, for his own greed, or whatever his motivations might be. So pair that with David Tennant as a character, and it's and so this trailer is everything. As I was reading more about it and looking into it, I was just like, oh, please let this trailer be good. And then that popped. I'm like, oh my God, this looks great, to the point where I was, I enjoyed Daredevil. The quality was amazing, but it's not, it was more just like a Marvel Batman movie,
right?
Which was well done. Don't get me wrong, but this. I am literally looking very forward to this. Like, I'm like, the opening night, if you will, I'll be there binging this thing.
So remind me, did Daredevil? Was that released in a normal Netflix way? Like the entire season came out at once? Okay, so they're going to do the same thing for Jessica Jones.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that's always. I mean, I'm totally down with that. I've wondered how people are going to experiment with the Hulu model.
Yeah.
Hulu, even when they're doing their own shows now, is still doing weekly releases and not allowing you to binge, which is frustrating, but I guess it gives them a little time to pivot if they need to or something.
Like shows like The Mindy Project are still being made as we go, like a traditional show would be.
Exactly.
So I think that model still has to remain for that, but like shows like this where Netflix, is sort of the pioneer, and we'll film it all, we'll make it all, and then we'll release it in one shot. I don't think they're going to. I mean, maybe they'll toy with it at some point, but that's sort of their bread and butter now. Is like, here it all is. If you want to read this novel in one day, go ahead. If you want to sparse it out,
exactly,
go ahead too. It's whatever you want.
Do you know anything about the show, about Jessica Jones, the character? Or anything?
I had never read the comics, and when they talked, the comic is AKA Jessica Jones, right? They dropped the AKA. From what I understand, she is a superpowered person who's really sort of reluctant to be a superhero. So she's just a normal chick with powers that has like a crime-solving agency or like a detective agency that she runs. And she kind of helps people, but she sort of, she only focuses in and around Hell's Kitchen, which is, the Daredevil neighborhood. So she's sort of part of that little sliver of New York, and she's just trying to do what she can. But all the meanwhile, the way the trailer makes this sound, the Purple Man, Zebediah Kilgrave, has some really deep connection to her childhood. So he's coming for her. And just some of the shots in the trailer blow me away. Like, walking into, like, I think it's like the police station, and everybody's frozen and everybody's like pointing like a gun at themselves, or like because he's manipulating them all to do that. It's these frightening sort of like, what if that someone had that power? What's the worst possible thing you can think of? And there's even and where I've gotten into conversations with people on this, I'm like, isn't the Purple Man great? They're like, well, yeah, but and they explained to me that in the comics there is this really disturbing sort of sexual molestation thing that goes on between he and Jessica Jones, and they're probably going to do something like that in the series. So it's
okay.
going to be interesting how they handle that, because think about it makes sense. Somebody with that power, with those dark motivations, I mean, it's only a matter of time before he takes it to that conclusion. So, but with those two actors, it could be horrifying, but like you want to clap because it was just so brilliantly portrayed, handled, so we'll
do you
see.
know if they're gonna like weave it into the Daredevil universe? I mean, is that the idea? Is okay.
So I don't know if you know this. Daredevil, Luke Cage, who's being introduced through this series originally, and they were going to do Iron Fist, but now there's talk that might just be a mini movie on Netflix and not a series. But they're all going to do a team up Defenders event when this is all sort of set up.
Okay.
So, and then at some point, I'm guessing, once all that's done, Infinity Wars 2 will hope come out, and all those people will be in that in some capacity, and there'll just be like some gigantic Marvel everything. And
that would be interesting. So is Luke Cage coming out on Netflix? Is that also
that's coming? I think in early next year. But his character's being debuted through this Jessica Jones series.
But they're shooting a movie of that, correct?
I don't think so.
Or no, it's just TV show.
Just
okay,
the show,
or a Netflix show.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I mean, Rosario Dawson's in it, I believe.
She's in all these. She's like a thread between all, and maybe she's not as in Jessica Jones as she was in Daredevil, but she's kind of the night nurse character, whatever that is. She's sort of the thread.
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, we've talked before. I definitely like the interweaved universe that way.
Yeah.
I'll jump into something that I had in our quick notes, which is not interweaved yet, which is Supergirl, the TV show, which I've been really interested in. I mean, I love that long preview they did earlier in the summer. So I've watched the first 2 episodes at this point, and it's definitely. It kind of walks in a line that I see in several other superhero shows where I'm like, well, it's not totally for adults, but it's not the kind of thing I can show to a little kid,
Really?
I mean, there've been a couple, a couple of really scary villains where I'm thinking of like, my 4.5-year-old niece or something. I'm like, well, she's, I can't. That's the scary axe in this guy can kill Supergirl with. I can't, that's too much terror right there. But it's also I don't know. I mean, on one hand, it's a good take on the character and putting her in a modern situation. She works for a media company from a woman who used to work for the Daily Planet, who split off and become this mogul on her own.
Oh, that's the Callista Flockhart character?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And she is. I mean, the unfortunate. This is very weird too. I also this year got addicted to a show called Younger. I can't believe I'm confessing, which is on TV Land.
Okay.
And of course,
Younger.
And of course, I would forget the character of that, just as you've forgotten the other actress's name. But it's a show about a woman who has she's quit her career to have a child and raise her child, and then she ends up getting a divorce just as the child is 18 and going away to college and a year abroad and stuff. And she's trying to get a job, and she can't get a job, so she pretends to be 25 years old.
Oh,
she's
okay.
40. And she pretends to be 25 years old. So in Younger, she basically has a Sutton Foster. That's who it is. She was Brett's girlfriend on in the first season.
Oh, it is
Flight
her.
of the Conchords, where they hold the signs.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Sutton is 40 and pretending to be 25. Her character, and
Is she 40 in real life?
yeah, I think so.
She looks really good.
Yeah, she looks great, and she
see
definitely
her
it's
being
definitely that
25.
thing of where you're like, I can get this. Like she's one of those people that can kind of pull it off.
It's not a creepy cougar being like, "Hi, everybody," and you're like, "Nope."
Yeah,
nope.
it's not Samantha from Sex and the City or whatever.
Yeah.
So she, but it's, she goes to work at a media company. There's kind of a Devil Wears Prada sort of thing where her boss is kind of a terror, and and it's like, well,
is her boss Hillary Duff?
No. Hillary Duff is like her pal. That's like, like us 25-year-olds got to stick together.
Oh, sure.
Anyway, but it's about a woman working in a media company for a nightmare boss who has a secret identity as a 40-year-old. And Supergirl is about a woman working for a nightmare boss at a media company who has a secret identity.
Yeah, I see.
So it's really hard for me not to see these as like, the same sort of template show. And I think that's done because, that's just sort of like the mainstream thing of like, well, we can't get too out of bounds with this. Let's hit some, all these topics that millennials like will relate to. I don't even know if they're targeting millennials, but it's like the character is supposed to be a millennial. Let's hit that media companies are hip. They're going to use social media there, and there's going to be all this hashtagging stuff. And so they've put Supergirl in that universe, and it's cool. They're definitely they established in the second episode more of a, I can't remember if it's Supergirl or James Olsen who tells her something about, like Superman's always about working on his own and being a loner, but our family's really, it must be Supergirl. And she's like, our family's really about being a team. He didn't know this because he left the planet as a baby. So
now James Olsen, that is Jimmy Olsen.
Yes.
Okay.
Who has been sent to, a national city or whatever city she's in by, like, he was looking for a move, and his good buddy Clark Kent was like, why don't you go work for this place?
Sure.
Because my cousin's got a job there.
Do they ever show either Superman or Clark Kent like as a character, or even like a shadow or like
he's
a hand
coming,
or something?
apparently.
Oh, okay.
So in the origin story, they showed sort of, like behind the shoulder, kind of him landing and bringing her to the foster family that she would live with, whose father was played by Dean Cain.
Oh, really?
And a great little nod to things. And there have been a couple of great cameos like that. Perd Hapley is in it as a news reporter, like from Parks and Rec. Is basically, I mean, he's not Perd Hapley, the character, but that actor is in it playing a reporter, and you hear that voice, and you're like, oh my God, it's Perd Hapley.
Now a story which is news that I'm going to tell you now. Well, you know why that is, though, by the way? It's the same creative team behind Arrow and Flash.
Okay.
And they love to do that in Flash. Like, they have gone to great extents in Flash.
Gotcha.
Like, you remember that original kind of crappy early 90s Flash live-action TV show?
Yeah.
So that dude is the Flash's father.
Oh, okay.
And they brought Mark Hamill, literally, because he played the Trickster, and they brought him back as, like, the Trickster who mentors the new Trickster.
Well, Mark Hamill played the Trickster in the 90s crappy Flash.
Yeah.
And he's played the Joker on Batman the Animated Series for 20 years.
The reason he got the Joker job was because the voice he does for the Joker is very similar to his Trickster voice. That was kind of the proto Joker. So here's a you probably know this, but like the original Batman the Animated Series Joker was supposed to be voiced by,
I don't know,
Tim
Really?
He was, and they had recorded a couple episodes with him, and it was too much. It was too. It was. Imagine what Tim Curry would do, and that's what it would be. I'm
picturing the Congo accent taken to like some crazy extreme.
Oh my God! I can't believe somebody else is singing.
I just watched it.
Oh my God! For the first time?
No. I saw it when it came in theaters.
Yes.
It just appeared on Netflix, so I watched it.
We'll have to do a podcast about Congo another day, because back in the day, so back when we had my family flirted with owning satellite TV for like a year, and what was great is we could record all the movies that came on it. But it was the summer of '95, which had things like the Batman and Robin with Val Kilmer and these other movies, but Congo was one of those. So we recorded that, and then they stopped it because they didn't want to keep paying for it. So I had this like 8 to 9 movies we recorded that were at our ranch that was all the TV we had. So I just watched Congo again and again and again.
Right. This is like how many times I saw Top Gun and Good Morning Vietnam.
Exactly.
those are
two
video
movies,
cassettes we had.
Those are at least good. Like Congo is not a good movie. Anyway,
that's true.
No, so Tim Curry was originally that. So they brought in Mark Hamill, but Mark Hamill's audition, you can listen. He explains all this in the very first Fat Man on Batman podcast with Kevin Smith.
Interesting.
It's like a 3-part episode, so get ready. But like he talks about how just that and the Trickster kind of voice. So when you go back and watch those Flash episodes, you're like, God, he sounds like the Joker. It was but that was the basis. So what was really great. Are you ever going to watch the Flash?
Probably not.
Okay, so. It's kind of cool spoilers for this particular little bit if you were out there. Last season of The Flash, and I've only watched a handful of episodes, but I've loved what I've seen. They introduced the new Trickster, and Mark Hamill and they don't say, it's not like that the canon of the original show is the canon now, that they're not saying that, but they keep pulling things from it. So Mark Hamill has been in prison this whole time, trying to set up this new kid to be the new Trickster, and they even have like his original costume and everything like hanging like in the police like archives and everything. Right. But what's really amazing is that he breaks out and he's hanging with the kid. He's like, and he's kind of got his crazy hair, but he's still a little bit more grounded. But he's looking at him. And he's like, and they're talking, and the guy's like, I always knew that I was special. He's like, it's more than that. I am your father. And I was like, oh my God. But it's the way he does it, the way he delivers it. It's so tongue in cheek and so self-aware that you're just like, oh man, good. Well, I mean, you could have, so the in jokes with that production crew of those 3 shows, they're I don't know if they do Gotham or not, but they do at least those three,
Right.
is really tight. And I'm even thinking at some point the Supergirl is going to merge into, because I think
Well, and that's why I brought it up. I wonder if they're going to become that, interlaced universe because, and by the way, Donald Glover also appeared in an episode
really
of Supergirl.
as Spider-Man,
That would have been amazing.
as a
he-
spider-like
as the
man.
mathematician from The Martian. No.
Oh, that'd be better.
He's just like a security guard that gets killed.
Poor kid can't catch a break.
Spoiler alert in reverse. But no, that's why I wondered because Supergirl, and this is a dumb thing to notice, but it airs the same time that Gotham does. So they're absolutely not
Yeah,
tying it
okay.
into Gotham. You
No,
know what I mean? It seems to
nothing's
me.
tied into
Plus,
Gotham.
Oh my God, Gotham doesn't make any freaking sense to me. Have I told
Gotham-
you my thing about I don't think we talked about this last time because I think I delivered this rant to someone else, which is Patton Oswalt has this rant about if he had a time machine, he wouldn't stop Hitler. He would go back and stop George Lucas from making the prequels.
Oh, I haven't heard this.
And
Yeah.
he talks about, if he had met, he's kind of pondered this and he's thought if I'd met George Lucas in 1995 or 7 or whenever it was, and he said, yeah, I'm finally making the prequels. And he's like, oh my God. And he's like, what's going to happen? Do you like Darth Vader? Oh, I love Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Darth Vader's going to be in this? Yeah. Well, in this one, you get to see him as a little kid. And he's like, no, I don't want to see that at all. I have no interest in seeing him as a little kid.
Yeah.
And that's what I think of Gotham is like, I don't care about
Yeah.
Batman as a child. Man.
Yeah.
It's just so dumb. And especially having the whole universe older than he is so goofy to me. So they can't tie it into Supergirl because she's 25 or whatever in this show.
It's a different crew. Like, so they've already tied. I mean, Flash and Green Arrow have crossed over.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing it's only a matter of time because again, it's the same. And CBS and the CW are all part of the same
Gotcha.
Viacom family. I'm pretty sure. So I think it will all be jive at some point, but they're doing so well. And I've seen I've seen as many Green Arrow episodes, and it's, they've introduced their own Ra's al Ghul and all these things. And so
really? Okay.
Yeah. So they've kind of been taking a lot of the stuff that would be Batman mythos and putting it in Green Arrow instead, which is cool. So
yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing is that there's a ton of maybe like second tier characters that probably deserve the Netflix CW treatment, which is like I would love to see Green Lantern as a TV show. I don't ever want to see Green Lantern as a movie again.
Do you know what? If this works out, if Supergirl stays solid, I think that will probably be the next one they do.
That would make sense.
Because that crew understands the levity that has to go into those situations, and their casting is spot on.
Yeah.
But if they're gonna do Green Lantern, like, let's not do Hal Jordan. Let's just make that like a known thing. Like, we already know he exists.
Yeah.
So let's see Jon Stewart.
Yeah.
Let's see Guy Gardner. Let's see those lanterns and just have different instead of going through, because that was one of the failures of the Ryan Reynolds movie, is that you had 15 years of showing Warner Brothers animated series around the Justice League.
Right.
And every single time it was Jon Stewart. Every time. So you have a whole generation of kids who have no effing idea who Hal Jordan is.
Yeah, exactly.
So when they go to Green Lantern, like, who's this white guy? Like, that's, it's like, instead of casting Idris Elba and just calling it a day.
My God.
Which, just to say that out loud is like, you feel like some cosmic fracture has happened where there's a reality where that did occur and we're not living in it. And so we're just like, oh, please come back. They're trying to right the wrong. Ryan Reynolds is going out of his way to be like, okay, I'm going to fix this as best I can. Deadpool, right? Remember that? Like, not even, and a second go at Deadpool, where it's like, so not only am I going to make you forget that I was in that terrible Green Lantern movie, I'm going to make you forget that X-Men Wolverine thing never even happened. And here's this. And,
Yeah.
it'll be amazing.
Well, on to movies.
Yes,
we should go.
thank you.
Is the one big one that's on our list, which is when we made these notes.
Yeah.
The second Star Wars trailer had come out, and in fact, like a couple weeks ago, or one of us at least, I'd been saying this to anyone who would listen, which was, God, I'm ready for another Star Wars trailer.
Yeah.
And they delivered it. We saw that before we could even record a podcast. The Japanese one came out yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you've seen that.
I have seen it. Yeah.
What are your takes?
So it's weird to me because they said that last the second trailer was like, this is the last trailer now, and this is the last new footage, and then sure enough they put this Japanese one out that has all new footage. That's even
my God,
better
so
than
much.
I even like the footage from that one better than the other one because it gives you all kind of cool angles and different droid stuff, and I was just like, so I'm why? I get that there's Japanese sort of subtitled writing over it, but why not just show us that one in the U.S. for real? Why not? Why mask? Do they think that we're not going to see it somehow, or like, you know?
I know you brought up during our Martian podcast about having the Chinese backers for films and stuff,
Yeah.
like when films take Chinese money and they have to sort of shoot alternate scenes and stuff like that for them.
Yeah.
I did specifically dig up the Iron Man 3 footage. It's on YouTube. It's
Is it
sort of
really?
like 3 minutes they've cut.
Ooh, wow. Is it? I mean, does it have a different spin in any way, or are there like? Is there like an Asian character who gets killed off?
Completely nonsensical.
Oh, okay.
and I went back to like IO9 or whatever and read about that, and they just, it's like literally they just tacked on the scene that makes no sense, where Tony goes to China to meet this one doctor who can operate on him and take the metal out of his heart or whatever,
okay.
and they just jammed it into the middle of the film. So granted, when you watch on YouTube, you don't see the context, you just see these Chinese doctors working on
It's
him
more
or
like a
whatever,
cool
and
Easter egg if you know the movie. So
right?
that works.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's I can't even imagine it in continuity.
What's interesting though is that I wonder if that's who was the Asian doctor in Age of Ultron who created the biosphere thing that generated.
Oh my
the
gosh,
vision?
you may have just hit on something. I have no idea.
Is she part of that? Was she there? Was that? I mean, maybe that's part of the same. Because she just showed up out of nowhere in Ultron, and you're like, well, where does she come from? And like, what was the context of her befriending Tony? And that would make sense if that was somehow connected to that random scene.
We shouldn't even get off on this, but I just Googled that Age of Ultron, and the very first headline is Chinese fans left close to tears by Age of Ultron translation.
Oh, geez.
So, and we'll just skip that. But back to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Were they targeting? Did they think, well, Japanese audiences won't respond to this American trailer that we've released,
Or
so we
vice
have to
versa? Do they think, well, the U.S. fans aren't going to like this, so let's? But even
It's
all
fantastic.
All that's moot because it's like why go out of your way to make a special version when we're all going to see it anyway? I mean, Disney knows that this is going to happen.
I know, and especially when it's a property that big, it's you almost like at least me, I just don't even believe that they're secretly doing. Like I don't even believe that it's like, oh, we'll do this and it will go viral. Nudge.
Yeah.
It just seems like no, they really did make a different trailer.
Yeah. By the way, though, I will say it again for the record, of all the movies to come out in the last like 10 years of hype driven event movies, they have I don't know what the hell they're doing but we haven't seen anything leaked. There've been there's maybe that one leaked set photo of Mark Hamill that's you have no idea what the context is or anything. That's it.
Yeah.
Like I haven't seen anything else. Like all the footage has been on purpose. There hasn't been any script that's been leaked or how have they kept the lid on this thing that tight? Like it's crazy.
Yeah, I think you and I talked before. Maybe it wasn't even on a podcast about how I'd seen Kevin Smith at Comic-Con, not this summer, but the summer before, so 2014, and he talked about a set visit to Star Wars, and how he got this call from J.J. Abrams who said, "You've got to stop talking about this." And he's like, "JJ, I'm not telling anything that's in the NDA." And he goes, "No, everybody is calling me wanting a set visit. You have to shut up about it." I'm not going to let everyone come visit the set.
Yeah. I remember that.
I mean, they've obviously they just locked this down.
He's hinted that he's seen it, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He wasn't even supposed to say that because he was on the Fat Man with Batman, or no, he was on a Hollywood Babylon. And he's talking about it in a way, and Ralph's just like, "Have you seen it?" And Kim's like, "I can't comment on that anyway." And I was just like, "Well,
yeah.
I wonder if that's if he has seen it, he's doing a damn good job of not just of holding his tongue as it is,
Yeah.
Are you excited? I mean, were you ever a hardcore Star Wars fan, or were you always just like, I love it? I mean, where are you on that spectrum of like diehard and like casual?
This is another thing we may have brought up before, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I was absolutely. I mean, as a kid, it was like that was the whole. I mean, here's my VHS trilogy of Star Wars pre messing with it, Lucas stuff, and so I was a huge fan. I mean, just it was everything when I was a kid, and I read this article recently where this person was defending the prequels, and I don't remember if I responded to the author or just said this to my friends that it wasn't really the prequels that lost me. It wasn't that I hated the prequels. I honestly didn't see them after the Jar Jar one.
Oh wow!
What lost me were the re-releases in the theater of the remastered ones or whatever.
Really?
Because I remember seeing that first one. I remember waiting this line at Fountain Square to see Star Wars, which had now been renamed A New Hope.
Yeah.
I get it. It was in the subtitle from the get-go, but whatever. We
Yeah.
never called it that when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And, you know, I remember waiting in line, seeing that and going, what the fuck did he just do?
Was it really
I
that-
hated so much stuff. And then Empire I thought was even worse than that because they didn't add any story details, as I recalled in Empire. There was just all this gibberish in the margins of the screens. Like they're just constantly robots moving around and crap. And I was like,
Yeah.
I hate this.
Yeah.
I have. Now I will totally recant that. And you and I plan to do like a podcast
Yes.
on Star Wars
Yeah.
leading up to the
I'll-
film.
I'll resist
And
any questioning
Yeah,
on this.
I'll go off on that then because they've since then the remastered ones have like won me over. I still have not seen 2 and 3
Okay.
of the
3's the best
of the
one.
prequels. Yeah. So I look forward to seeing those whenever I'm around someone
Sorry,
who owns
3's the best one of the prequels. Let me just
Right.
clarify that, just in case you're like, what the hell did
and
he just
Empire
say?
is the best one of all. And
Yeah.
so but I have gotten progressively more excited about Star Wars. And, you know, when we noted that second trailer, I mean, I literally had chills watching that. And then
Yeah.
this Japanese one caught me by total surprise. I was so blown away with that, just the action pieces in it, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know. Everything looks to me like JJ can do no wrong with this, you know? So I mean,
agree.
story wise, maybe it gets a little out in the weeds or something, but
Yeah.
I mean, come on. As long as it's not two politicians arguing over trade deals or whatever for a half an hour.
I have some
I'll be happy.
predictions though.
Okay.
And I'm probably, I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who've long since discovered this too, but there are some posters. I'm trying to find the one right now. I think it was like the newest poster that has Rey, the female,
Okay.
I forget the actress's name. But she's always holding like a staff as her weapon every time, right? And this particular poster, and it's like I gotta find it. She's in the middle, and it's like it's got on one side, it's got Kylo Ren and like the whatever the Empire's called now, and on the left side, it's got Finn with his blue lightsaber and some other stuff. But she's right in the middle, and then right behind her, as that extends, like the lightsaber of Kylo Ren extends right beside hers. So I have two theories. One is that they are brother and sister. She is Kylo Ren's sister. But more importantly, I think that's kind of a foregone conclusion to a lot of people. More importantly, I think she's going to turn to the dark side in movie 2.
Ooh.
And that staff is going to become a Darth Maul style lightsaber. Because if you look at the way it looks like the hilt of the Darth Maul, it's just a little shorter. It's got kind of the same sort of, and I'm just like, imagine, and then the third movie is about trying to redeem her, and she does turn back without dying,
Yeah.
hopefully. I don't know. I'm looking at it just going, it's about time we have, I mean, again, female protagonist, yay, but it's about time we had a female protagonist, female lead turn bad and then turn good again. Like that has not been mined nearly enough yet. And I just feel like that's kind of, I might be wrong. Maybe that's a movie that I'll make myself someday if they don't do it, in terms of another story. But just, I look at that going, I think there's some subtext in there that, eagle-eyed people are supposed to think
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
So
Well, that's interesting symbolism.
Yeah.
At least. So
Yeah.
okay, cool. Should we jump into it and maybe?
I want to say one more quick mention. by
Oh,
the
you
way.
got one more quick mention.
After,
Okay.
so if you haven't listened to our review of The Martian,
Oh, right. Sorry.
please do so. I think it was the last podcast we did, but
Yes,
we
it's
go
episode 6.
If you've watched The Martian, and I think The Martian might even still be the number one movie. It's been funny to watch all these other movies come out and try and fail to dethrone The Martian.
know.
And it just kind of stays number one.
And it's in IMAX 3D now.
Is it really?
Yeah, I'm really excited to go see that.
It wasn't before.
No, because that opening weekend, I really wanted to see it in IMAX, and there was something so stupid that was holding that. Like, I know sometimes it takes longer to when they're converting to IMAX and distributing.
Sure. Yeah,
so
yeah,
I guess this probably wasn't shot in IMAX, obviously. So they were, there's some conversion to factor in, but it is now in IMAX. God knows when I'll get this podcast out, but
Well, one thing I did want to mention that I didn't think about during that particular episode that we did is, and I caught myself, and the reason it came up is because as I was listening back through that, I'm like, did I call him Mark Watney or did I call him Mark Whitaker? Because Mark Whitaker is the name that the character that Matt Damon also plays in the movie The Informant,
right?
And so I really want to do, I haven't seen anybody do it yet, and it's probably a little late now, but it would be really funny at some point to find the time to put a little mashup meme together of the Informant and the Martian into the same kind of thing. There's so many weird little similarities, And I think there's a lot of. I'm a huge fan of The Informant. I love that movie.
I love that movie. Yeah, Soderbergh. I mean,
it's got all these comedians.
Matt Damon is so weird in it.
It's so weird, and just the way it's put together. It kind of came out around the same time as Burn After Reading. It's just kind of.
I was just about to say it
fits in that family of like, oh god, and
feels like a Coen Brothers film.
Yes, yes,
it's so
but
off the
with
wall.
Soderbergh's sort of style and shooting style and everything. So, I want to do. And there's so many little touch points in there that if I ever get a digital copy of The Martian, I can kind of toggle back and forth and almost have Mark Whitaker talking to Mark Watney in terms of like coaching him through all this. I think there'd be a lot of
he's on the ground in the ground control crew.
Yeah, I think so. So if I have time over Christmas and I can get a digital copy of The Martian, I'm gonna try to put something together. So anyway,
awesome. I would love to see that. All right, so the main thing that we wanted to talk about today was suggested by you, and I'm just going to let you take it away and describe it.
Well, it just so happens that I have been thinking not just recently, but for quite a while about the future of, I'll just say the future of story in kind of a broad term. And story can take any number of mediums. It can be obviously film, it can be video on TV, it can be comics, it can be books. But when you start to think about books and the written story in general, that's where I think the most, I think there's a lot of, we haven't hit the level of innovation on books yet that we have on like TV or movies or short films. And I just keep thinking like, why is that? What is it about the medium of the book that's so resistant to, a plethora of ideas or, all this kind of, innovation. And there was a Bret Easton Ellis podcast I was listening to, and he, if you happen to listen to that podcast, he a lot of times laments the death of the novel and gets all esoteric about it. But he makes a lot of good points, and some of the guests he has on talk about, they use it as a broader jumping off point to talk about the death of physical media and what that means to the culture and blah, 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 blah. But that sort of fueled my need to talk about this with you, because I know you, I have obviously are a very prolific writer and have published, online, offline, and have different things going on. So I want to kind of just walk us through a conversation and get your insight on a lot of these things. And hopefully if you're listening, you also have thought of these things, or if not, maybe it'll push you to think about consuming this stuff in a different way or wanting that. But I'll just kind of in no uncertain order. Thank you. I'll just ask this particular question: is the traditional novel dead? In your opinion?
Oh man, that is such a loaded question.
I know,
or deep question. I don't know how to answer that quickly.
Before you even say anything, by dead, obviously they will still. When something's declared dead, it still usually sells. But is the traditional novel important to consumers under, I'll just say 40. Let's put it,
Well, on one hand, so I follow a lot of authors on Twitter, and I don't know if it's the audience I'm following or if it is an audience in general, but I'll tell you the YA, the young adult novel, is absolutely not dead, and more important than it's ever been. Yeah, which is shocking to me, I guess.
But do you think, to you, is the young adult novel in most iterations no different? To me, the young adult novel, when you walk into a bookstore, sans like things like The Hunger Games or some of these things, you look at the young adult novels in terms of what the covers are, what the stories are, it looks like it is just this decade's iteration of the Harlequin romance novel, that they're just churned out. And they're all derivative and they're all repetitive. And I know there's some diamonds in the rough, but it seems like that's sort of where that is. And so they're so easy to digest. I think it's more just that might be why they're.
I think I see what you're saying. I would probably, and I don't know because I'm not a reader of a lot of them. Yeah. So I can't really vigorously defend them. I would think that I know what you're saying, but maybe that description is a little harsh. Oh, but I think what you're saying is they are kind of pulpy in that way of and I think there's sort of a split too, where we think of YA novels as like The Hunger Games or Twilight or something, but below that there is definitely a below that. I don't mean in ranking or something. I just mean sort of hidden from pop culture view. There's a substrata of really smart YA novels that
Like, I mean, the book Wool, would you consider that?
I don't even know that.
Oh, see, I haven't read it. I just know that there's like a whole series and the fervor around that. Well,
And I think those series that's probably where it turns really pulpy, you know, where they've got something they're just cranking out or something. You even thinking that, even just talking about this moment here is like, I don't know that I could mention, you know, current novels for adults. You know, and I could name probably 5 YA novels right now just that I've, you know, that have been bounced around my, you know, my consciousness.
Let's start with that, because I think that sort of does draw a line in the sand of, you know, a lot of the YA stuff is serialized. It's based on an ever progressing story, much like what Netflix is doing, much like what comics has always done. It's just a little longer form, right? But to your point, I mean, walk into a Barnes & Noble or your local bookstore, like what are the adult novels that are even out? I mean, I'm going to go to Amazon right now and see what the bestsellers are. Because
if I go off what when I walk into a Barnes & Noble and see those immediate like bestseller things, there is a lot of fiction there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all fiction on like how to improve your life. That's sold as nonfiction, but it's all bullshit.
True enough.
I mean, maybe that's what happens as adults progress to this, like, no, I need my bullshit to be, you know, to pretend to tell me how to cook like the Paleolithic people did or something. I mean, maybe that's how we consume like our fiction now. It's a weird thing too, because, and I mean, this is specifically why you bring it up, I think, is because you and I both write fiction.
Yeah.
And so it's a very weird thing to think as you ask these questions to me. I don't know what the last novel I read was, but I'm writing one.
Yeah.
You know, that's sort of a weird, like, that kind of makes me feel uneasy of like, who the hell is going to read anything I write, you know?
So the last one I read was Ready Player One. Back this summer and blazed through it. But I think about my favorite books, like just regardless of genre or you know what it is, you know, my top 10 favorite books, the top 3 or 4 are going to be probably, you know, fiction books like Dr. Sleep, like Neverwhere. And Dr. Sleep is only 2-ish years old. And so that was, you know, I found that simply because it was on Amazon's recommendations list. I'm like, oh, Stephen King, Dr. Sleep, sequel to The Shining. Well, that's cool. Came to find that it was way more than just cool. It was, you know, completely rocked my world. So when I'm writing, I'm thinking about like, I want to create an experience like this, where the reader is like, oh my God, and they just have to binge it as it is, you know, over a weekend or something. But then I'm like, is that overestimating the attention span, interest, etc. of a reader? You know, Stephen King has had 30, 40 years to build up an audience that there will always be somebody who want to read a long form Stephen King. You know, a good chunk of people who want to read long form Stephen King. It's fine. But with somebody new or something new, and I also mention this because I have friends who are authors who have, you know, gone to great lengths to write a novel or a book or something and have a really hard time generating an audience.
Yeah.
And I'm like, is that because you're assuming too much? Even if your audience is full of friends and family, are you assuming too much from them with this format called the novel? You know, is there a disconnect there where that isn't the ideal format for that story anymore?
Well, and maybe you're hitting on something right there, which is when you ask about the future of the book, or you know how you introduced this, there are things that we can remix the form of a movie and still call it a movie or sort of understand what it is. But it's definitely a little bit more difficult to remix the book because at the, you know, whether it's on Kindle or in paperback, like we kind of assume, well, if it's a book, it looks like this. You know, it's a little bit harder to start putting that together. And I can think of examples of things that have sort of broken with that standard format or something, but they're really rare. You know, and they're kind of all over the map. It's not like you can say, sci-fi turned into this kind of thing with its books, or literary history turned into this, or what. I mean, you know, a book is a book. We sort of understand what a book is.
It is, except so when it's printed, yes, it absolutely is. Even when you're reading it on a Kindle Paperwhite, then yes, it still is. But when you're reading it on an iPad or a smartphone where there are other apps and other experiences, the books, because it's in the print and mostly pure Kindle form, it is a pure experience. There's nothing else is going to come in and hijack your attention. That is the vessel that it's in is all that is meant for. When you get to an iPad or a screen, and Kindle sales as devices have fallen precipitously as as iPads and things have kind of taken that, and the Kindle app exists there, but people are using those color e-readers or colored pads for that. When that happens, now all of a sudden you have an email app, you have a web browser, you have a Spotify app, and a YouTube thing to hijack your attention.
Yeah.
So a book in that format is not necessarily, to me, I don't think it's the same thing anymore. It becomes something else that you can't wrap your head or attention around in the same way. And it's that kind of jumping off point too that I'm wondering are we missing as a community, as a world, as the publishing industry, missing a beat to accept that okay, a lot of the future reading is going to be on this device. What can we do? What can the package or the mechanism be to take this story? And is it such that we with certain, and this could take us any number of ways, but is it such that with certain stories we don't look at 300 and 400 pages or 50,000, 100,000 words anymore as a one-shot unit, as a one-shot offering? We say, okay, to build attention and trust and interest in this author, we're going to take what would have been a 400-page novel, the next Game of Thrones. We're going to break it up into like 10 or 12 mini pieces that are either free at first, or maybe the first 3 are free, and then you buy them for like $2 a piece, and turn it into the comic model where there's a series. Because you think about the way comics are now and have always been. I mean, it's not like they're just the way now, but a comic comes out, and they do a single issue, another single issue that builds on that, and they keep going, and they get 10 or 12, and they stop, and they collect it into what's called a trade paperback, and they sell that. And it's like, oh, here's this thing. And then they keep going, and then if they collect like 3 or 4 trade paperbacks, and they'll collect that into a hardcover volume of some kind, and they just keep going, they keep going. When you look at that hardcover, or even just the trade paperback, like you've got on the table here, Black Science sitting here, like that. At the end of the day, that could be that's a novel. It's just all the stuff that would be written out is visually represented. But they got to that point, and sure, you didn't start with it. You didn't start with the single issues of Black Science, did you?
No.
Yeah, so you just jumped right in. But there's a lot of people who started and got familiar and acquainted with that, so they're now hardcore fans of Black Science. So having that alternative way to get into an author or get into a creator or storyteller, I feel like that. There are opportunities there that have not been mined enough on the pure play, writing side of things.
All of that you said is so interesting to me on so many levels, and one of them is that's really random is length. And to some extent, people define a novel by length.
Yeah,
and especially, and you've probably encountered this. Like, I've been at that stage for the past couple of years where I'm trying to pitch literary agents and, reading how to write the best query letter and what's the right length for this, for my outline or my synopsis or the novel itself or the, even the nonfiction books I've written. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like, why are we defining it by length?
Yeah.
And I mean, you take that and you pull it back and look at like the Hunger Games or something, which I don't know anything about. Tried to read the first book, could not care less about what was happening in it. And that was probably, if you took, are there 3 books, 4 books?
3.
I don't know. If you took them and smashed them into one novel and got rid of all the extraneous crap, it's probably pretty good. Like it probably should have been sort of a serialized pulp, like shorter books that came out more frequently. And I don't know, then maybe it's 5 books, but they're shorter, or maybe it's 1 book and it's that length, but it's not 3. Game of Thrones.
I was just going to say,
because especially the way he tells it from POV of every chapter, he could start and end those books anywhere. And honest to God, you could make an argument that he does, because it's not like the every one of them starts with some crazy, prologue chapter where he's introducing new characters that have nothing to do with the story you're about to read.
Yeah.
You forget all about them, and then something dramatic happens at the end, but he could have stopped it anywhere in between.
Yeah.
And you could, if we, maybe if his publisher said, after 300 pages, like, we're cutting you
Well,
off.
it would help with
Like,
it would help with their business model too, because instead of waiting 7 years in between
Jesus.
publishing, they could be doing every 2 years. Here's a new one. Here's a new one.
Right.
And we look at how HBO has crafted the series. I think the interest in the series on TV is much higher than the books, simply because it's delivered in that way.
Yeah.
It's the same damn
Oh my
story
God,
for all
no
intents and
kidding.
purposes, but it's like, and so imagine if he were to have written it in and maybe instead of one book, it's 3 or 4 chunks.
Yeah.
And then he could just keep going, So I wonder what I would love to have if he was sitting right here, right now, George R.R. Martin. I'd be like, okay, so what compels you to push out 1,200 pages in a tome? Like, why do you feel that is the goal or the focus of that story at that time? What drives that? Is that your publisher? Is that you just going, I feel like, you think about Lord of the Rings too. Now we think of Lord of the Rings. It's one volume,
Right.
but it's 3 separate books, that are Lord of the Rings. So when you buy Lord of the Rings, you usually buy just the one.
yeah, that's what I did.
And granted, they still sell it separately too. But when you look at it separately, it almost takes you by surprise at first. You're like, oh, there's these 3 books that are part of Lord of the Rings. Oh.
And there's sort of a more moderate length. Like you're like, oh, that's a novel. It's not like a freaking Bible.
This insane, yeah. And Lord of the Rings is not. It's unlike The Hobbit, which is meant to be a children's book. Lord of the Rings is much more studious writing, and it feels more like an anthology of this world. In addition to a story being told, so it's kind of intimidating. And I feel like every time George R.R. Martin comes out, he tries to replicate that every time.
Oh my God, no
so
kidding.
It's like, what if each book was? And I probably would read. I have not read a single Game of Thrones book because it's too long. And because the show exists, I'm like, I only have time for one or the other. However, if he had put out, if every 2 years or even every year, I know here's the next, 250 pages, I would probably jump in because it would be a cool thing every year to be like, oh, here it comes again. Here it comes again.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now I'm become a diehard George R.R. Martin fan when I wasn't before.
Or what if Kindle had a subscription model where he just published every chapter as he finished it?
Yeah.
And because that's what you were touching on too, is the serialization.
Yes.
And I'll artsy up I'll church up this conversation a little bit from Lord of the Rings and stuff, is that even like, that's not necessarily a new model. I'm almost certain that all of Dickens' novels were serialized in newspapers. I know for a fact that Ulysses by James Joyce was serialized,
Sherlock Holmes.
which is super freaking, brainy works that like, or at least James Joyce, where it's like every chapter is written in a completely different style. And it's, it's like to think of that coming in your newspaper every month or whatever is crazy compared to the way we consume novels now. So it's not, this is not, like some off the wall idea. It's kind of like, how do we get novels back in people's hands?
Yeah.
I like your premise of, how do you activate that readership besides handing them a 500-page novel and saying,
well, it's interesting
read this and report back to me. Like that's an awful way to encourage reading. You want to kind of dip your toes in. And if you could have read like, say, 3 chapters of Game of Thrones and known whether or not it was worth your time, you might have just kept reading those chapters,
Yeah. Well, and you could argue, well, you can just get the book and read 3 chapters and find out. But I'm like, no, I want it to feel like there's a start and an end. Like, but you think of, as you were talking, you think about exactly everything else in media, even music to that, to some degree. Music is kind of its own thing, but everything else in media, everything else in story media follows the bite-sized model. And you could say, well, Netflix puts it all at once. Yes, but you can still watch individual episodes and decide, I'm not going to commit. Binging becomes binging because everything just flows together well and it's great. But you can still watch the first 3 episodes of Jessica Jones as it is and decide, no, not for me. And then you're done. Like, you don't have to sit there and feel like, well, I bought this whole book and now I'm guilty because this giant thing's sitting there and I don't have time today. And, they make it so that you can work your way into it. And if you are, you are. If you're not, that's fine. TV's work that way. Comics has worked that way. Video games, I don't know. See, that's the only difference. And that video games have these.
Don't they do that with the like expansion packs and stuff?
That's true. Yeah,
unlocked
that's true.
levels and things like that.
But if you buy Assassin's Creed, you're buying like every 3 to 4 years. You're buying the Assassin's Creed main game that's got like 100 hours of play or whatever. That's different. And there's another twist on this too. And then that's an immersive world where the story is occurring around you as the game goes on, and not necessarily you sitting down and so TV, film, video, comics, and books are the only thing where you like start and linearly go through and you finish at some point. You know? So books are the only thing that don't behave in the same way. And again, fiction books.
Which is like, yeah, and when we think about it, like I was saying, and like you've been saying, that's really just something that's come up in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the history of literature is hundreds and hundreds of years old, and it's really only the past 60 years or so that we've gone, no, you got to publish the whole thing all at once. Like, you know, and some of that I think is not necessarily driven by what the audience wants or what the market wants, but it's what, you know, this is what I think about what so dramatically changed in the music industry with at the advent of Napster and then the invention of iTunes was the music industry had gotten used to selling a CD with 14 songs of shit on it and one single.
Yeah.
And
you had to wait 3 years to get it.
Yeah. You know? And then all of a sudden it was like, no, I can just buy the one song that I want, or I can just download that from my friend. And I think the book industry is sort of the same way. Like the people who sell books and literary agents and stuff like that have they've got a model for how you sell a book.
Yeah.
And so to some extent, they're probably contributing to this problem because they only know how to, they say, you know, if you're writing your first novel, it's 100,000 words. I don't know, I'm making this up, but they give you like a word count and here's what the synopsis should be and here's what the act structure should look like. And well, yeah, they're just selling like the same thing they know how to sell. They're not saying you write what you want and we'll figure out how to find your audience and sell it.
See, and that's Seth Godin's point, is that he's constantly talking about, every time he talks about book publishing, he's saying traditional publishers have long been in this cat and mouse game of finding readers for your writers when it should be flipped. The publisher should be the channel that has readers that you're finding writers for. It's like, hey, we have these people, these hardcore people are into Civil War. You know, they're Civil War fans. They love everything Civil War, and we have the email list that is those people. So, hey, you author over here that's an expert on the Gettysburg, you know, sort of sub battle. Like, we want you to write a special book for these folks over here. We want to put it out next year. So all of a sudden, they're going out of their way to find, you know, much like HBO has a channel, has viewers. Netflix has viewers. So we're going to serve those viewers with creators instead of the other way around. Instead of being like, hey, here's this show or here's this book. Hey, everybody. Hey, you know, it's like, and so he's been that model. And that model is largely predicated on traditional retail, right? You know, it's like it takes so long to print a book and it takes so long to then take the printed book and find shelf space, which is limited and blah, 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 blah. So they can only do it that way previously.
Exactly. That is such a huge point. Yeah.
You know, and so now that's gone. So now it's like the onus is on us as creators, as consumers to want and expect other alternatives. I know I still bust open a traditional old classic hardcover book and read it from time to time. I prefer Kindle, but I kind of, and so I'm not discounting that is a good, you know, format for some people, or, you know, even for me. But I think it's the onus is on us to find these other ways to take, you know, pure play. I'll just call it pure play, written story or pure play story, and you know, just carve it up or find different ways to do it. Find different ways for fiction to build that audience, because you just see the glut of stuff being put out. That's the other thing too, is that to attract that attention is one thing, but the competition for that attention is so, I mean, you could have the best friend in the world who put out a book and you're like, hey, and I actually had this experience happen to me where one of my really good friends in Denver put out a book and I'm like, oh, I'll get to it. And having read the first one, I was like, I'll get to it. And I still haven't gotten to it yet just because I don't have the time. So I'm like, if she had put that out as like, you know, chapter by chapter as a blog post each week, I would have found the time because it would have been 10, 15 minutes of my time each week. I'm like, oh, cool. And then by the time it was done, I would have read the entire thing probably. And then if I really liked it, she could have sold me or, you know, pitched me like the hardcover sort of collector's souvenir of the book that I might never crack open, but it's like, well, I read it, but I want to display that on my shelf because I love this.
Yeah.
You know, so almost the book becomes that at that point.
Right.
But but now I'm like, well, I read the story, so now I'm eagerly awaiting the next one.
Right.
So I might read the next one start to finish, knowing that, oh, this is really good, or I am really interested in this, or I might just continue to, you know, crank through the one-off weekly thing too, you know.
When we were putting together the notes for the show, and I said, you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about was sort of those new models for it, and one of them I'd forgotten to put on the list is Lean Pub, which specializes in like mostly like, you know, books by developers for developers. So, you know, here's a big manual on Python or something that you want to learn or whatever. But one of the cool things about what they do is you can say, look, I've got a 400-page manual on the CSS coming out. Here's a sample chapter. And as I understand it, their model, you as the consumer Like they, if I've only got like 2 chapters written, I can say, hey, right now it's $5, but you'll get the whole book when it's written. And then as it's written, when I've got 40 chapters, it's going to cost $40. Like I can change that, because coding books cost outrageous amounts of money. It's silly.
Yeah.
But basically it's like, if you get in at the beginning, you're going to get the whole thing for cheap.
Interesting.
And as chapters are changed and edited, they're going to push you the edits and changes, and you buy it, and then you choose how to download it. Do I want a PDF? Do I want a Kindle ebook? Do I want a Nook? Do I want iBooks? Whatever format, they just allow you to download it and do it. So that's one model, which is kind of, here's a sample, get in at the beginning, and the price is going to go up as I get closer to the end.
Yeah.
And then there's this other one that I think is really intriguing, which is Inkshares, which all these things that encourage authors to sort of jump in and start doing their thing.
Yeah.
That without the traditional model, I think is great. Like I don't want to bad talk that at all.
Oh, sure.
But their model is, you go find your readers, like you're giving them a pitch, like a Kickstarter kind of thing.
Yeah.
If you hit enough people, like if enough people say, and I think it used to be 750 and now it's 1,000 people. If that many people commit to buying your book, then Inkshares goes in, partners with you, and prints it. And, edits it, prints it, helps you make the cover, does all the production work for you, and your partners on the royalty split.
Do they give you a platform to find those people?
Yes,
Okay.
their website is definitely like a platform for there's sample chapters and stuff. But what we're talking about now, it makes me think, well, yeah, but the problem is you're still going all in on a completed work.
Yeah,
maybe you get a sample chapter or something, but in reality, it's dumb for me unless I know like, I want to read this whole book. It's ridiculous for me to say, yeah, I'll pay $12.95.
Yeah.
To see if you finish this and I like the finish. But it's like, I would much rather go the serialized model and say, I'm going to pay $1 per chapter.
Yeah.
And when it loses my interest, I stop paying.
Yeah.
But
well,
it's a weird, I don't like that Kickstarter all or nothing kind of deal.
The all or nothing. I mean, let's just take a practical example. Like as we've explained before, I'm a huge fan of the series East of West, Jonathan Hickman on Image. And I discovered that purely from a one-off, like they were in between seasons, or last December, and they put out kind of like The World, like a little World compendium, single issue thing. And I just thought, and the cover art really struck with me. I'm like, what is this? Is going to start opening. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. What is this? And they had like a little mini story in there too, but it was like the most perfect sort of introduction to this. But they had just completed year 1 and they were going into year 2. And if that had come out, and I think he's doing like 4 or 5 years of the apocalypse and the whole story. If that had come out in one gigantic thing, the cover may intrigue me, but I'd just be like, this is going to take forever. I'll get to it eventually.
Right.
I probably may never have read it. This way, though, I could go back and sort of henpeck at 1 or 2 issues and go, oh, this is cool. And then feel like I could catch up, but then feel like now and more importantly, instead of waiting a year for him to finish year 2 or 2 years to finish year 2, where all of a sudden he's got to go back out and remind everybody, hey, you remember you liked this 2 years ago? It's back. Because the onus shouldn't be on me as a consumer to wait and constantly check in. Like,
right.
I need to be told by the creator, hey, it's ready. So if you can figure out how to do that, fine. But if every week now I'm invested in checking in, and like all of a sudden now I will have consumed that entire thing over the course of 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But I have paid attention to him and have funded him the entire way.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is that? What is that for? And you could argue the pure play written novel or written story does not lend itself to that. Like, there are some stories that like, Da Vinci Code or Angels and Demons, like, and I would say Angels and Demons, if I had to read that as chunks, you'd have to tweak it because it very much it's one night as a story, and it would feel very disjointed to have to go, oh, every 15 pages I got to stop and wait another week. Like what the hell? Like
that's a huge point too, is because for me at least with the novels I've written and just the way I conceive of writing a novel is I got to write the whole thing before I want anyone to see it.
Yeah.
And even when we bring up these other these famous people, it's like Dickens might have been writing week to week. James Joyce might have been writing publishing chapters before he knew where he was going.
Yeah.
I don't really know. That may have they may have fallen into that. And I think comic creators, they have a little bit more room to dance around on that. And because it's a collaborative process already, it's not like one auteur's vision. It's people collaborating on a vision, and so it's going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
And maybe where he ends up is not where he thought he would would when he started.
Yeah.
But for authors, it's much more of like a solipsistic, process.
But what about like, so maybe now as you're I'm thinking out loud, like maybe this what I'm describing works perfectly well for anthologized short stories or serialized short stories. Because what is Sherlock Holmes if not several short stories about Sherlock Holmes that came out in the newspaper? That's how it was published too. That were then collected together and bound together. But Conan Doyle could drop you back into that world. So what if there's short stories about a world that you can keep building on? So it feels comfortable for the pure play written format, but it can still build a world. You can build a brand around the author, and you could potentially have it in other mediums and stuff. Because at the end of the day, like, I mean, maybe you're not like this, but I find it hard to believe there's any writer who does not want to have the opportunity for other movies to be made, TV shows to be made, video games to be made, potentially made off of that work, like to have it expanded and live in other formats if need. I mean, maybe there's some out there who just like, no, the written word is the only word. But, it's like, if you have that ability, I keep thinking, and maybe it is a case by case basis. Cause like with you, I mean, have you ever written a short story that you're like, it's ready now, but you're compelled to keep going with more from that character, more from that.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and it kind of builds off of the last thing I said, which is like, I just don't write short stories.
Gotcha. Okay.
So for me, it's like I conceive of like, this is gonna be a long ass story.
Yeah.
And long ass to me is like, I'm still writing Pulp Fiction length things. My two novels are really short, like 50,000 words or something, and and that's just kind of. When you look at what I've read as a kid, like the James Bond novels or something, that's what I'm shooting for. Nice. I just want to be like Pulp Fiction,
Yeah.
So, but I have thought about that. Like I've conceived of that. Like this would be a cool way to develop something, is to come up with those characters, come up with that world, write a story that's sort of self-contained, and then build on that with other stories.
Let me take a personal example from my side. So I have been working on a book series now for almost 7 years. The reason it's taken 7 years is because I overly ambitiously. Can you do that? Overly ambitious. Two adverbs. Anyway, grandiose ambition. Let's just say that. Decided it was going to be a 4-book series, and I spent the first year of those 7 years like literally outlining the entire thing, because I'm like, I'm not going to be like lost and not know where this is going. I'm going to have everything perfectly mapped out. When if anybody should doubt this, I'll be like, no, there's a plan, and I'll mean it. So I have this entire thing, but it's every time I go back to work on it, I'm like, I have to look at book one. And if I, two things are sabotaging me. One, if I change a bunch of stuff in book one, I then have to go through the outline and say, how did these changes ripple through the rest of it? Which is very, if I could crank these things out, that'd be fine. But that puts me back off another month or two, just because I have to go through that work. The other side of this, though, is that every time I get to a certain point, I'm like, no, and I constantly go back and change, When if I had just... And sure, it has improved significantly as a story since I started, but I'm to that point now where I'm just spinning my gears, because I'll get to a certain point and I'm like, no, and I'll tweak, but I have to tweak 300 pages.
Yeah,
I can't just tweak 15 at a time, and then as I'm going, I'm getting increasingly disheartened that I'm going to spend all this damn time on this thing, and sure, there'll be some people who care, but I will have missed some massive opportunity to build an audience around this world as I go, and it may not necessarily fit perfectly into this, but the way I and this is just me consciously doing this, I'm like, I want this to be so easy for a TV producer to go, oh, there's a season. So I even have there are 10 chapters in each book. Each chapter or section has like a name or a title like an episode would, and it's composed of little small Kurt Vonnegut, Dan Brown micro chapters. Right. So I use those to control the pacing back and forth. So I could take each chapter and just put it out every 2 weeks or every week, and it would feel standalone, but it would still feel part of a connected whole, like an episode would. And I'm really considering doing that, because I'm to the point now where I'm like, I can't. It'll be another 7 years if I keep doing the way I'm doing it. And that's that necessitated a lot of this discussion too. Just me going, am I missing something by trying to force it into this Game of Thrones, format, or can I just start putting it online? And then if a bunch of people love it and they want to read it and they want to hold it in their hands, I can do like a kick-ass, like limited edition vinyl, as it is, hardcover kind of thing that I design. That's limited edition that is $100 a piece or something. Because by that point, if you have people who are like, no, I want to hold it, and it's not just a Kindle version. But I think to get, and then you just keep going with that model if it works, because then so let's use you. If you had heard, oh, hey, Taylor wrote a book, when would you have time to sit down with 300 to 400 pages in addition to everything else you have going on? I mean, would you, knowing who I am and knowing that we're friends, would you jump in, or would you hang tight and wait until you had time, and maybe 6 months before you have time?
I mean, I would definitely, I love that question. I would definitely try to jump in. I mean, I've been in the same position you have been in with other friends where I've been asked to read something and it's like hard to get around to it just because, I got other stuff going on, or I got other stuff I want to read. And it's like, there's sort of a weird priority in my head of what comes first or whatever. But certainly because we do a podcast and you check in on me all the time, I would feel like I have to. But it raises that other interesting question of what would be the best way for me to do that.
Yeah.
And I think your point is like, if I knew a new chapter comes out every week on your blog, then, I almost have no excuse or something. I know where it is. I know it's easy to get there, and you're not putting too much responsibility on me to go hunt it down.
Yeah.
If it were on Kindle, I'm pretty good about that because I love the original Kindle. Like I've hung on to mine for so long. I want the new Paperwhite, but I'm just like, I'm in love with the old one with the keyboard. And and I'm really good about, I also have the apps, of course. So I'm really good at like, if I've got a spare couple of moments, just opening Kindle and reading something on my phone,
Yeah.
That's me personally. I don't think you can count on that. So that blog example, I mean, if it's on your blog, I can read it on my phone.
And you can share that link on Facebook. You can, a friend doesn't have to go download it, find it, then schedule time to read it. You can just go on Facebook or Twitter and be like, hey, first chapter's out today. It will take you 10 to 15 minutes, maybe, give or take, to read it. It's all of a sudden now you've taken what could be, 10 friends being like, I guess, to now 100 friends being like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
And that's not assuming they will all like it, but at least gives you the option for them to go, yeah, I'll check it out.
The problem I know too from releasing music is like, sometimes you need that barrier to entry to really commit the audience to whatever it is, because the problem, I mean, on my blog, which has been untended for a couple of months, but in its heyday, I, ranted and raved about this a lot, which was, it's just a real personal goal and value of mine to get everything out as free and open as possible, to let anyone read it as much as possible. Like I aspire to the open culture or the free culture tag on Creative Commons, even though I still hold back when I license my stuff and allow the, whatever it is, the non-commercial is the one restriction I put on it. Like, you can remix my stuff. I just don't want you, making money off of it or whatever. I aspire to just like, let it just be free, but I know when I do that, I would release records or singles or EPs or whatever, and then I would have people come up to me. I thought I'd been doing a great job of sharing it on social media, and I'd have people come up to me and say, yeah, so what's going on with you? Are you still recording? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I've been sharing this every day, all week. Like, obviously, it's the easiest thing in the world for this person to listen to it, and they're still not doing it.
And the song is what, 3 minutes? I mean, it's 3 minutes. So there's an interesting thought. Can you get, because what I'm suggesting assumes that those same people would instantly spend 3 minutes listening to a song. But you could argue too that a song, people are so persnickety with their taste in music, whereas a story holds some kind of mysterious captive hold on people.
Well, and the other thing is there's a whole marketing discussion we could have, which is like, your friends are not your fans.
Yeah,
that's
true.
And as these are easy examples for us to give and say, I put it on Facebook and it's easy for my friends to share it, but they're really not going to be the ones that engage with you on it because, for whatever reason, I don't even want to speculate on that because it almost sounds negative towards your friends or something, but that's not really true. Really, what you're trying to do is make it available enough for other people to connect.
Yeah.
And one of the things we talked about with The Martian, which we both learned after seeing the movie, I think, was that the author of the book was publishing it chapter by chapter on his site, and grew that audience, had that perfect success. I think the story is he shopped it around and got rejected a couple places, and decided, I'm going to publish it myself with Kindle Direct.
Yeah.
So he did that, and then after that, once the Kindle version that he had published became, rose into the top 100 or 20 or whatever on Kindle. It got it convinced publishers like there's something here.
Yeah.
And I believe he got the book deal and the movie deal sort of simultaneously at that point because he'd sold enough.
When you think about that book, though, that is a story that could lend itself to that serialized chapter thing very well. It's like,
does it? I mean,
I think so. I mean, I've skimmed it a little bit, and just when assuming the book and the movie are pretty much the same thing,
Yeah.
I can see several points where you're like, you engineer cliffhangers in there. You
Yeah.
can engineer things that
I see that
would over a week be like, and you're
Right.
anticipating, but then when you read it together, it's just one
it's
more
just
like
as satisfying.
you're just like, well, I can't go to sleep now. Like what's
Right.
and just keep going.
But I also see the problem with that is regardless of whether he had the whole thing conceived or if he was writing chapter by chapter,
Yeah.
at least that is to me a bad example of what you're talking about because he has the lost problem of where you're going to, as soon as you're reading the first chapter, you're thinking, oh shit, how's he going to resolve all this?
Well,
you know what I mean?
But then there's something else that we haven't talked about yet, which is if you do this, after about 3 or 4 chapters, you're likely opening yourself up to the influence of the audience.
Yeah.
You get to see which characters they resonate with or which thing. Maybe you had a plan that all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, everybody loves this. And this is the real book. So you shift your story to accommodate that somewhat. And then in doing so, build more loyalty. And,
Yeah.
and it's not as purely ego-driven art, which most art is, but there could be some kind of cool collaborative effect there that hasn't been mined nearly enough yet for these kinds of stories.
Right.
If we wouldn't be having this conversation if 25 successful authors have tried different things and we've seen it, but we haven't seen hardly anything. We've seen people scratch the surface at best with things like The Martian or
Well, I think the problem is there probably are a lot of people experimenting and stuff, but it's sort of like the remixing the form or whatever. It's like, It's so rare to, I mean, if I think of the most successful, novels that I hear about in my Twitter feed, they're all very conventional novels, and you don't hear of the Martian story, even that is probably a pretty conventional kind of novel. I mean, as awesome as the story is, and I'm sure as unique as the storytelling is, and all those details and scientific influence, it's still probably a very conventional arc structure, and it's words on page. It's not. It's it's maybe not multimedia. It's not breaking too many walls down or something.
Yeah.
So it is difficult to think of those things, and maybe it's because as soon as it breaks one of those rules, we go, oh, it's not a book.
Yeah,
it's
Well,
it's something else.
You bring up another good point. So when you introduce multimedia elements, let's say on a blog, you're doing. Let's say in a perfect world, somebody is successfully doing this chapter week thing, and it's they're 2 years into this project, but a chapter is the written stuff, but then there's also little short films that they film that might just be simple environment shots that they've created with motion graphics or short films or something that's just of that story. Or it's, they grabbed, a couple $100 and found some actors and filmed a scene that, so it goes, it's written, and then it stops and you see the scene between these two characters and then it keeps going. When that's all integrated in an interesting, cool way, is that still a book, or is that is that a multimedia experience at that point? What?
Well, I mean, and maybe it's one of those things where we get to that point where, and I'll bring it back to music again. I remember, it was in the CD days, but after the maybe after iTunes had come out, or Napster probably at least, and we were starting to talk about digital, and I remember referring to a complete work as an album.
Yeah.
And this friend of mine going, oh, it's not an album, it's a CD.
Oh,
and I was like, no, album doesn't mean vinyl. I was like, no band goes in the studio and says, let's make our new CD.
Yeah.
They say we're making an album, which is a collection of songs. It's like a photo album or a music album. It's the same thing. It's a word that means this thing.
Yeah.
And whereas CD just meant that's the medium that the album is going on.
Yeah.
As a compact disc. Maybe what's tripping us up is book is really the word for the medium that it used to be, which was hard or soft bound paper.
Yeah.
And maybe what we're reading now are novels, but they are not books.
Well, yeah.
So maybe once you get that
Yeah.
multimedia in it, it's still a novel.
Yeah.
It's just not a book.
Because I think about, like, let's say I did this. Let's say I created that with the video and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden, like, I'm home at Christmas, and friend neighbors like who would be perfectly the fan of this thing, and it's like, oh, what are you up to? I'm like, well, if I tell them, oh, I put out a book, they'd be like, oh, where can I get it? Instead of I couldn't tell them that, but I couldn't say, hey, you got to go on your computer and read this cool story with other stuff that
Yeah.
So how do you sum that up in a way that's not going to freak them out and make them go, I'm going to go do that right now? Like, maybe say, hey, I have a novel online. You should go check it out. It's important that we define these things at some point, because there's going to be a lot of, civilians. I think we're sort of more in industry, and we think about these things in more technical terms, and it makes sense to us. But there's a vast majority of people who just want a simple, clear, like, tell me what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise I can't wrap my head around, like, it's cool enough that you did this, but I don't even know, like, do I have to sit in it? Do I have to sit in front of a computer? Can I do it on my phone? Like, there's all these questions that get in the way of a buying or a attention decision.
Yeah,
So it's like, what do we eventually call that? And we don't have to do it right this very minute, but, like, I think these are the kinds of things that need to be packaged or defined a bit more.
No, you're absolutely right. I'm going to take you back to the outline thing of your growing outline of the 7-year project, because this is something that, I don't know, maybe it'll be helpful or interesting or whatever. So I had read, and probably on IO9, I believe, a while ago, someone had done a blog post on the influences on George Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series,
sure.
which you may not have heard of, or I don't know what he was doing. It's, whatever. It's, it was just sort of collecting a few things. Several which I did not know. And one of those is a series of books by Tad Williams. Did I get that right? Yeah, Tad Williams, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn.
Oh, wow.
So I downloaded the first one on Kindle, and it was really funny. I remember IO9 or whoever, I'm sorry if it was someone else, their write-up was like, yeah, a northern king dies and an unexpected, bastard child is living in the kingdom. And it was like, holy shit, he wasn't just influenced, he just took this whole story. But Martin is definitely like paid tribute to Williams and talked about it. So it's not a rip-off in that sense. But I downloaded the first one, and Williams wrote this I would say, like, sort of painfully protracted, like, introduction to the novel. And I just remember him talking about the outline and how it just got out of control, and how he had basically made up his mind, this is 3 books. And so basically it's 2, long fantasy-sized novels, and then one that is, like, so huge that they had to print it in 2 volumes in paperback because the spine couldn't hold. Like, it's, it is as long as Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Just that one book, but he was like, no, it's a trilogy, damn it. Wow. I'm not going over that. But I just remember him saying such good things about that, and it's, I don't know, it touches on all those points of, like, he had conceived it this way, and that's how he wanted to deliver it, and that's the vehicle he thought would be best.
Yeah,
and what we're saying here, I think this should all inspire you on to breaking whatever format you can with that story outline, and maybe not even thinking of it as a series of different things, but it's just a series.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because that was the other thing too, where I'm like, what if suddenly this becomes really popular? I mean, I would hope that would happen, but, like, what if it really does? And I've limited myself from the get-go to just 4 things. I mean, right. And as I thought about that, I'm like, there are so many threads that could just keep going. This isn't like a Harry Potter where he lives and it's over. That arc is done, and we really don't have anything else to say. Speaking of things that were influenced by other things, as you were talking about Game of Thrones, I want you to go on your own time, and you at home do this too. Go just type in The Worst Witch into Google. And it's a movie from 1986 that has become a classic Halloween movie at this point, starring Tim Curry, by the way.
Of course.
and bizarrely enough, Charlotte Rae from The Facts of Life.
Oh yeah, Mrs. Garrett.
It is about and see if you recognize any similarities. It's about a school for witches and wizardry, or no, sorry, just a school for witches and witchcraft in England that is run by this gray-haired, wise old witch, and also this dark, sort of stern teacher witch who is a classic British actress, who dresses all in black and gives the main protagonist witch a hard time. the main protagonist witch has a sort of gingery looking friend that she runs around with, and they're always, they're constantly, having these misadventures at school. She's ragged on by a blonde haired, elitist, rich, other witch who's constantly giving her crap about, being the worst witch. Let's see, where else does this go? The Grand Wizard is who Tim Curry plays. He's not like this, but it hit me about 5 years ago. I was like watching this movie going, oh my God, if J.K. Rowling doesn't admit this at some point, it's too eerily similar. The fact that there's a Malfoy girl witch is what really blew my mind. But then you have Diana Rigg basically playing the Snape witch. I'm just man. How... And the fact that it's Diana Rigg, who in the late 80s was like, she was the Alan Rickman, the female Alan Rickman was Diana Rigg in the late 80s. Like, it's like, who else could this have been?
Dude, I don't even know what, honestly, I mean, not to go off on a tangent here, I don't know what she did between the Avengers and Game of Thrones. But to me, it's just like, well, that's enough.
Well,
I mean,
if you want,
she was the female Alan Rickman. Like, I mean, I must have seen her in movies and just not put it together. Like, oh, that's Diana Rigg from the Avengers.
And she was of that stature. She was in her like late 40s and was like, I can be that sort of elder stateswoman of acting. But if you really want, if you haven't paid attention to Diana Rigg during that time and really want to enjoy yourself, go the Disney Channel in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, commissioned a series of like musical fairy tales.
That kind of Alan Rickman. Gotcha.
One of which, by the way, was Puss in Boots, where Christopher Walken played Puss, who could turn into a human and would dance and sing around and stuff.
Of course.
But Diana Rigg played the evil queen in Snow White.
Okay.
And it's amazing.
Okay.
It's amazing. She sings like she has a bunch of different song numbers. It has a really dark and twisted ending, strangely enough.
Huh.
There's kind of that dark Jim Henson vibe to some of these. But I distinctly remember this on the Disney Channel. But Diana Rigg is the queen, and she chews the scenery so delightfully.
Wow.
There was another reason I'm pulling out my phone right now is there was going back to Bret Easton Ellis to kind of tie this back to the beginning. He was interviewing an author, and I apologize because I don't remember. I think it was Bruce Wagner. It was a David Shields. Yes, it was David Shields. The author David Shields, who is putting together right now, he's got this really ambitious, like he's writing novels like a TV show, like seasons, and he's planned out like 6 seasons of this thing, and there's like each season has like 4 or 5 books.
Okay.
But it's like this huge sprawling freaking thing. I'm pretty sure it's David Shields. I'm just double checking this.
Well, I don't know exactly where you're going with that, and just in the interest of filling up the space in between us at this desk, as you're saying that, I'm thinking back to something you said earlier, and just sort of wishing that when George Martin is done with Game of Thrones, what would be so great to me is if they published one Kindle version of it.
Oh wow.
Instead of feeling like it's separate books, put those there. He just published a new book, by the way, of course, because he should be doing other things. But he did. This is not one that he's originally written. So he wrote. Okay. I mean, he wrote it, but it's been written. Yeah. It was a series of short stories about Aegon and his knighting partner. So it's called the Dunk and Egg, or the two.
Oh yeah,
two people. And I think it. Oh my God, I can't remember. It's a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, I think is the way they've compiled this and put it out. But it'd be great to see all the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms stories in chronological order with all of the Game of Thrones stories as one complete publication. Yeah. And then you just think like the whole thing's done. Yeah. I'm just going to check in and sort of read a chapter at a time. Yeah. Instead of feeling like I got to finish this book. Yeah. Or that thing of like, for better or worse, that Kindle has introduced to us, where we're watching the percentage of the book that we are finished with. I mean, obviously you're going to do that, especially if it's a huge book, but it's like, just enjoy it chapter at a time. Just get into like, this thing's going to go. I mean, you could read a chapter of Game of Thrones every day and it's still going to go on for a year or 2 or something. Yeah.
Well, as you're saying that too, I'm like, I kind of want them to prove our point. I want them to do that, but I also want them to do that physically so that we can just see how ludicrous this gigantic omnibus, like Game of Thrones omnibus, this basically a Gutenberg Bible for like all that.
Well, as you were saying that about that other author, I'm thinking like, God, why even call it 5 books per whatever? It's just like, put it out in chapters or episodes, and then at the end of the whole thing, like you were, whatever your other example was, then put it out in different volumes or however you want to package it at the end of it, But maybe the serialization doesn't need to be thought of as a book. You
It's
know?
exactly. I think that kind of sums it up, honestly. I know you were going to talk about National Write a Novel Month.
Oh yeah, which is this month, which is November.
It's November.
Yeah.
And I've tried, and you know what? And I have tried that 2 or 3 times because I'm like, oh, this will inspire me. And again, the enormity of that goal, I think, just eventually, it collapses under its own weight.
I think it's such a great exercise to know that you can finish a thing.
Yeah.
So it is a really great exercise in I'm going to finish a book. I'm putting this time limit on. I know how many words I need to write, every day.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just got a tickle.
He's got a tickle, folks.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's probably a terrible way to write a book.
Yeah.
There's my punchline. Right
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, do you want to talk about process real quick before we wrap? I know you mentioned a couple of things that you do use that I'm always interested in that too.
Well, along those lines, along the NaNoWriMo lines, I've never participated in NaNoWriMo, but I'm always aware of it, and it has at least inspired me to work on other things and try those deadlines with myself and stuff like that. So I just
Can we just comment real quick on how cool an acronym NaNoWriMo is? Like,
I know, and as far as I know, it has been around for 14 or 15 years.
wow.
Yeah.
That acronym or just that
The actual thing,
National
NaNoWriMo.
Yeah, NaNoWriMo. It sounds like a really cool hipster club that just opened up down by, it's like, let's go to NaNoWriMo tonight, guys.
It's like they thought of a hashtag before hashtags were ever even invented. No, a hashtag NaNoWriMo.
Dirtbox is playing tonight at NaNoWriMo. Let's go see it.
Yeah, that's one. I mean, that's one great technique of like I'm going to take this many words per day or whatever. I was just going to tell you like what what I've been doing lately. So yeah, if Pay Dirt app is out there and wants to sponsor a podcast, I would love to plug them every week.
Pay Dirt yet,
but they're the billing software I use for my freelance work.
Oh, sure.
And
Okay.
I confession, have not used a billing software before this. I've used spreadsheets and manual crap. And
does it manages your hours for that purpose?
yeah.
Okay.
So what I've done is create personal clients for myself for personal projects, and then I'm just running time on them, so I know how much time I'm spending per day on like a personal writing project.
Okay. Do you get discouraged by that as that ebbs and flows? I mean, like,
it's great. The problem I had before was because I'm a freelancer, looking at Pay Dirt and seeing like these are the hours. These are only the hours I've billed this week, and that's very frustrating to me. So I'm actually more encouraged by this in logging the hours I've spent on personal projects, because then I look at it and I go, "Oh, holy shit! I worked for 60 hours this week."
Yeah, and
it feels a lot better to me. Like, oh, I'm working an ass load. It's just on personal stuff that I'm not billing for,
Okay.
So putting it in there is like, and on some projects where, I'll set it to like, don't list my hourly rate. Like, this is unbilled work. But on specifically on one of the writing things I'm doing right now, I have it showing my hourly rate. So it's a personal project, and I kind of know at the end of the week, that's either what it cost me or what it eventually needs to make me.
Gotcha. That, I like that.
And I also use Basecamp, for my professional work, but I've used that a lot. Especially last year, I wrote a nonfiction book about work, which was it's a really specific style. It's every chapter.
Say the title. For
sure.
sake.
It's called Good Simple Open.
Available now at Amazon.com.
Yeah, and at goodsimpleopen.com you can read it serialized. But it's it was written in a very specific way. Like every chapter is it's not fiction. It doesn't continue a story. So I just used Basecamp and made tasks every day of like, write this chapter, edit this chapter, write this chapter.
Okay.
So it was very good for just keeping up with, these are the ideas I have, and this is how I'm going to check it off and get to my goal.
Okay.
And that really worked out, and I just liked it. And then I forgot to mention this. Let me loop back to Pay Dirt and Good Simple Open. Let me tie the whole thing together. When Taylor and I talked like a year and a half ago or something, when I was planning out Good Simple Open, you brought up to me this paradigm called Madman, Architect, Carpenter, which I looked up. It came from Betty Flowers, I believe is her name. She was an English professor.
Okay.
She actually called it Madman, Architect, Carpenter, Judge.
Oh, she adds that fourth one.
We have Taylor and I go back and forth. Taylor thinks that in a production environment, the architect and the judge are the same person. I think that's a good idea. Like if you're talking about web production or something, she was specifically talking about if you're one person, you inhabit each of these roles as a writer, and they should come sequentially. So in PayDirt, I've actually made tasks called Madman Architect.
Oh,
and
neat.
I've changed, to writer. So I know if I'm just thinking about something on a project, I hit the Madman. I hit a timer on Madman. So I know I spent 30 minutes just being a madman today.
Wow.
Or I spent 30 minutes being a writer.
That's a great idea. I never thought about doing that. For those of
Oh
you
my
at
God,
home,
the traditional like Nashville dry throat allergy season has hit me as we hit the end of this podcast. I'm so
if
sorry.
you're at home and I mean, I have used Basecamp. I actually prefer Noseby, which is a bit, for my visual taste, I just like how it looks better. I like how it's organized and laid out a little bit better. So if you want something that's an alternative to Basecamp, like check that out. Noseby app or just Noseby. They have different, free versions if you're just a single person. If you're in a team, it's very, very economical. So
That's cool. I think you've mentioned that to me before, and I have not looked it up. So
yeah, I'm actually looking at my Noseby dashboard now, and it syncs with apps and stuff, just like Basecamp or any of those do. So it's
cool.
Pick your poison at the end of the day. I think we covered it though. I mean, we
Man,
could go.
no kidding.
There's more I'm sure it could be said. So if you're listening to this, whenever you are listening to this, definitely shoot us an email and let us know what you think. I'd love to know too, like how people out there in the world, what their preference is. Is everything we're proposing just kind of garbage at the end of the day? And you're like, no, a simple book is a book, and I just want that. Like, is that all you want? Or you're like, you know what? Screw the book. I want it to be projected into my mind, and I want to have a mind share. Like, if that's your version of a story, then that's taking it to a whole other world that we'll probably be in 10 years. So we should probably at some point address that. But I love it.
That's what Todd and Taylor are going to do, is address the mind projection novels.
I mean, we joke about that, but that might be where we're headed at some point, folks. So we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yeah, maybe that's where the Todd and Taylor show is headed. We'll just start projecting this podcast into your brain.
Into your mind. Like Zebediah Kilgrave projecting stuff into your mind.
Oh, I love it. We wrapped it back up.
Jessica Jones. They let him keep his British accent too. They let him keep his, that's more like Cockney.
I thought you were going to go into the Australian. We can pitch the Bundaberg again.
Ah, yes.
Yeah,
Bundaberg.
Let's sign off with the Transylvanian Australian.
Ginger beer. No. It's funny that every time I pick it up, I don't do an Australian accent. It's like everything but that. It's like,
right.
And I think even my Australian accent is basically Murray from Flight of the Conchords. I need to be careful.
Yeah, those Australians are funny. Those
Exactly.
Flight of the Conchords guys.
Exactly. Well, anything you want to promote as we wrap?
No, I'm coughing so much I can't promote anything.
Well, you can visit me. I'm at Taylor Trask on Twitter. And at some point, or at various points, you can learn more about me at taylortrask.com, TaylorTrask.com. I promise, if you're listening to this in November, there will be something there soon that's pretty cool that'll finally get me up to par. So check that out.
I'm looking forward to that. And I am at HeyToddA on Twitter and HeyToddA.com, which there hasn't been a lot of activity there as of late. It's just sort of the standing portfolio. We are ToddandTaylor.com.
That's right.
So find all our old episodes there. We've now done more episodes in season 1 than in season 0.
Have we really?
I think.
Oh, that's fantastic.
My God, excuse me for all this coughing. I'm going to go drink like a gallon of water, and we will sign off and see you later.
Alrighty.
All right, take care.